On three, two, one.
I'm Mark Matson, and this is the Earn and Invest podcast.
I remember the day I decided to leave my financial advisor. Over the years, he had moved my portfolio in various directions that included many individual stocks, several favored fund managers, and an insurance policy here and there. As my wealth grew, so did my AUM fees, to the point that I was paying tens of thousands of dollars a year for returns slightly less than a typical S&P 500 index fund. I eventually decided to self-educate. I liquidated most of my portfolio in a tax-efficient manner and landed on a three-fund portfolio. The grand majority a low-cost total market index, maybe a third in a total foreign market index, and a small allotment in a bond fund, which seemed superfluous given my steady and stable employment income. And after much reading, I added in a small cap value tilt. I didn't want to be my own advisor. I didn't want to DIY it, but I realized that that was the best way for me to remain engaged. I had lived through two very different worldviews. One, investing is too complicated and you should offload it to an expert. And two, investing is easy and don't waste your time paying for it. Today we ask my guests an important question. Was either of those worldviews right? Mark Matson grew up in the rural hills of West Virginia and experienced firsthand what life was like for struggling families in Appalachia in the late 1960s. Escaping poverty and creating prosperity for himself and his family meant leaving the only world he knew. In his new book, Experiencing the American Dream, he reveals how all Americans can learn from his humble beginnings and define their true purpose for money. He is the creator of the American Dream Experience, a conference dedicated to teaching families how to understand their purpose and reclaim their dream, and the Matson Method, a tool that integrates research in behavioral economics, finance, neuropsychology, and human performance into an innovative investing science. Mark Matson, welcome to Earn and Invest. Let's start with your humble beginnings. Talk to me about the difference between your grandfather and father and their orientations towards money.
Yeah, so as you said, my dad grew up in the hills of West Virginia. I was born there, and my grandfather worked at Union Carbide and also in the coal mines with really destitute poverty. And every summer we'd get in the car and we'd drive to West Virginia, and we would, see all the dilapidated shacks and the poverty and the trash thrown in the creeks, and it was really disheartening. But my mom and dad got us out of there by the time I was 5 years old. And when I was 10, I asked him when he was getting ready for work, I said, "How did you do it?" And he said, "What?" I said, "How did you get out of that destitute poverty?" And he said, "Well, it's about asking the right questions." And I thought, well, that sounds like something from Star Wars, maybe Yoda would say. And he said, "Think of it this way. If I had asked like my dad did, why am I doomed to live a life of poverty and destitution and pain and suffering, my life would have turned out one way. Instead, I asked myself, how could I create wealth and prosperity for myself and others and escape?" And based on that different question, a whole new world of opportunities opened up. So for me, I looked at these two men who I admired. True, my grandfather had gotten us out of the coal mines and gotten us out of destitute poverty from that method, but my dad had really experienced the American dream, and he really drilled that into me, that hard work, individual responsibility, being accountable, creating wealth and prosperity for other people first before you get it for yourself, became part of the ethos of the family. And so they saw the world in two completely different ways, almost like two different dimensions. So much so that when my grandfather finally came to visit my dad and our family, we weren't really wealthy. We had maybe a 1,500 square foot home. But when he walked in the front door, he said, "Well, how many people did you rip off to get this house?" And all he could see was that money was evil and that anyone that had it was evil. So it was a terrible screen. So I really learned a lot from watching those two men.
You spend quite a bit of time in the beginning of the book talking about these different screens or these terministic lenses in which we can look at the world. Is this the same as limiting beliefs? Because I remember I'm reading through this and I'm thinking, this sounds a lot like something I'm very familiar with, is those limiting beliefs that hold us back.
It's very, very similar to a limiting belief. The way that I talk about in the book is that we don't see the world we only see what our screen will allow us to see. And sometimes screens can be very great things. I mean, if you're a doctor, you spend a lot of years determining and learning the language of being a doctor that allows you to see patients in a way that a regular person wouldn't. On the other hand, most screens are by accident. They're things that we pick up from other people, things that we experience, things of our culture. And so they can be very limiting, so much so that they actually become what I call demon beliefs. It's a belief that's so destructive that not only does it not give you freedom, fulfillment, and love, but it actually creates a lot of pain and suffering, anxiety and stress, and actually anger and arguments within your family and with other people. The beliefs will only allow you to see what your confirmation bias allows you to see. And most people don't, they're like wearing rose-colored glasses. They don't know they have them on, but it skews everything.
I want to talk about two different terministic screens in your life. Let's start with the one with your father. First and foremost, how do you think he made that kind of worldview switch? How did he realize, okay, the screen that I've inherited from my father is not the reality I want to live in?
I think for him, he didn't view it as a screen, but what he did view it as, he saw the pain and the suffering that was going on around him. And he just wholesale rejected that. They were so poor that he would only get one pair of shoes a year. And usually it was a pair of black shoes right before school started. And he wasn't allowed to use those on the gym floor because it would scuff up the floor. So he'd have to take gym in the socks. And the bullies would come along, and my dad was a little guy, and he would take these big, nasty rubber balls, they used to have in gym class, and they would just light him up. And he would walk home with the pain and the suffering of the poverty. And he just vowed, while other people got beaten down and less able to take action, for my dad, it was the opposite effect. He actually got angry and he said, I refuse to live like this. And that was a new screen for him. And he formed it when he was very young. And he also formed the entrepreneurial screen when he was very, very young. He learned how to sell newspapers, get up early in the morning and sell them in Charleston, West Virginia. He shined shoes after his newspapers were sold. And he sold cloverine salve to the coal miners so that they could, have something on their hands when they came out of the coal mines bleeding and calloused. So he was very entrepreneurial and he loved people from the very beginning. So it just became part of who he was. And it was a rejection of everything that my grandfather had believed.
I want to fast forward to a rejection that you ended up having, a terministic screen you had to see through as a young financial advisor. At some point, you looked at how financial advisors were treating their clients, and you kind of had a breakthrough moment. How did that come about?
Had several, but one of the big ones was I was told by my broker dealer, and I went right out of college right into being a financial planner. I had a degree in finance and a degree in accounting, and my dad was in the finance world as a financial planner. And so this was part of my life dream. He was always my hero, and I wanted to be just like him. And so I was told by my broker dealer, look, you want to sell active mutual funds with the best managers. You want to do partnerships, you want to do annuities, you want to do all these products, and many of them had very, very high commissions. And so I started doing this with my clients, and I would win trips to go to the conferences, and and they would wine and dine you, and pay you off and with prizes, and usually these trips were in the Bahamas. But what I looked at was it wasn't working. It was really obvious after 3 or 4 years that the people that had picked the best stocks in the last 20 years were not repeating. So stock picking wasn't working. It was super obvious that market timing, trying to get in and out of the market at the right time. We had people like Harry Dent and others trying to tell you that they knew exactly where the market was going to go, trying to predict economic predictions, trying to predict political predictions, and then tilt your portfolio based on those predictions. Obviously wasn't working. So stock picking wasn't working, market timing wasn't working, track record investing, finding the best managers for the last 30 years, and they didn't repeat. And so I was really beat down. And I remember going to a conference and telling the president of our broker dealer, I was 27, and he viewed me like a snot-nosed kid. He was like, I'm like, this isn't working. He's like, what's your problem? Just sell them something else. Earn another commission. Just twist them. And I had this pit in my stomach. I was like, I can't do this. I absolutely cannot do this. And I went to a debate, and I heard Rick Singfeld debate Donald Yachman. Donald Yachman was a five-star mutual fund manager at the time, the value expert, and he yammered on for like 20 minutes, and it was incoherent. He couldn't even explain his own investment philosophy. And then Rex Singfeld got up and made the argument that, look, markets are extremely efficient. All the knowable and predictable information is already in the price today. Therefore, only unpredictable and random information coming forward is going to change prices going forward. And so stock picking, market timing, and track record investing are all gambling with your money. And it just hit me like a train. I mean, it was just like, it was incredible. It explained everything to me. I knew instantly he had to be right. And that changed the way I looked at the world of investing ever since.
The name of your book is Experiencing the American Dream. And after reading this book, it's very clear to me that one of your roles as an advisor really is all encompassing. We're not just talking about making money. We're talking about helping your clients, helping people around you kind of experience that American dream. What's the connection between money and the American dream?
Yeah, I think to start off with, sometimes it's helpful to debunk what it's not before you can see what it is. And what a lot of people think it is materialism and greed. They think that, oh, it's buying that big house or getting a portfolio up to $5 million, or, someday when I retire, that someday ism thing. But for us, it's not any of that. It's about living a life of self-expression and creativity and imagination, and creating freedom, fulfillment, and love inside of your family and connection with other people, and using money as an empowering source versus a source of anxiety, stress, and just barely hanging on. Most people view money as hard to get, hard to keep, hard to invest, and they have a scarcity mentality about it. For us, the connection is, once I have, one of the other things I saw was that I had clients that had a lot of money, $5 million. And I had some clients that only had $500,000. And I thought, as an investment advisor, the more money I helped them get, the higher their quality of life, the higher their happiness level would be. And I found that absolutely was not true. Some of the most miserable clients were the ones that had the most money. So I thought, well, if I spend the rest of my life just trying to help people just get money and build their portfolios, I might be successful at that. But if it doesn't create real happiness or freedom and enjoyment in their life, then I could waste 30 years of my life, doing nothing other than money. So it became really clear that money itself can't make people happy. As a matter of fact, it's sometimes the opposite. The more money people have, sometimes the more they struggle over it. So that's when I saw that how critically important purpose was in people's life. That if I have to have a purpose for my life, and then I can align my investing and the way I spend my money and allocate my money in alignment with that purpose, and that purpose is what creates happiness and fulfillment, not the money itself.
So now you're speaking my language when you talk about purpose. I wrote a book about what being a hospice doctor taught me about money and life. And one of the big things that I talk about often in that book is this idea that it's actually purpose, identity, and connections that we should be building our financial life around. And I went to market this book and I did a bunch of speaking events, et cetera. And I got a reaction I wasn't expecting. People would come to me angry after my talk, and they'd say something to the extent of, you keep on telling me I need to find my purpose, but I have no idea what purpose looks like in my life, and it's stressing me out. So the question for you, the question I get all the time is, so how the heck do I know what my purpose is?
Yeah, that's great. I think another reason people get frustrated with purpose is, I've thought a lot about this when I wrote the book. A lot of times people avoid purpose, or the suggestion that you should have purpose, because they know if they have it and they get it and they find it, then they're actually going to have to take some action. And the action scares them as much as having the purpose scares them. So here's how I look at it. I tell people, look, the purpose isn't something you were born with. There's not an organ in your body that's a purpose organ. It's not somewhere out there in the world. Your purpose is something that you create in language that I talk about in the book. And so you kind of have to experiment with that and come up with and write about it and journal about it, come up with different purpose. We have an exercise in the class that deals with it. And you write down your different types of purposes and the things that are important to you. And then you drill down and start saying, okay, well, if I lived my life like this and I woke up every morning and creating freedom for my family, or, creating love and generosity for the community, or, what would give me a life worth living? And inspire me and uplift me every day. And when I start to find that, the thing that lights me up and makes me excited about my life, instead of hearing the alarm go off and going, oh no, another day, here we go. I should probably work out and eat right today, but I'm kind of tired and worn out. That's the thing that lights you up and makes you feel close to other people. And normally it has something to do, for me, is being of service to other people, putting other people first. And if I do that, then my purpose ends up getting fulfilled.
The other one I often get is people say something to the extent of, well, that's kind of a privilege of having lots of money. But the rest of those out there in the world who don't have a lot of money don't necessarily have the privilege of looking at purpose that way. What do you say to those people?
Oh, man. It's just the opposite, as a matter of fact. So I have this thing in the book called the destructive cycle of wealth. And I tell people in the book, money doesn't make you happy. And although that sounds cliche, but why not? Well, the more money I have, the more things I buy, and you might go out and feel great about that new house or great about that car or great about whatever you just purchased, but it doesn't last. And then comparative analysis, you start looking at other people. Well, that's a bigger boat, or that's a nicer house, or that's a nicer whatever. So the money itself doesn't bring any happiness because you end up just always needing more. That's another reason goals don't per se bring happiness, because I achieved that goal, then I need another one to have another high. If I live for my purpose, however, and I have $100 million, great, I can find a lot of ways to make a difference. But if I have a purpose, I really don't need money. Because if my purpose is love, I could get a piece of paper and a crayon and make a card and go visit somebody in the hospital and love on them and share with them and be there and hold their hand while they go through a sickness. Mother Teresa had purpose. She had no money. Gandhi had purpose, no money. On purpose, had no money. And while I wouldn't, most people aren't going to aspire to that kind of life and austerity, the truth is the less money I have, the more purpose I need. So I don't think it's a luxury item. I think it's a life necessity.
When you put purpose first, the way you're talking about doing, how does that change the way in which you invest?
Well, if you don't have purpose first, the default is gambling, because the default purpose for money, just hardwired in, the default purpose for money is always more money. And to get that more money, it leads me to speculate and gamble with my money. I want to find the next NVIDIA. I want to find Bitcoin before it goes big. All my friends are getting rich on this tech stock. And so that leads investors to make terrible investing mistakes. I have an exercise called the abject absurdity exercise. And the point of the exercise is that it's abjectly absurd to gamble with your money if you have a purpose for it and your life that's bigger than money itself. So the purpose lays the foundation to give you the motivation not to get sucked into speculating, not to gamble, not to forecast. And without that purpose, it's just too easy to get just sucked back into gambling. So purpose is absolutely key. And then I can start looking at, instead of what the media and the broker dealers and the people out there that want me to believe that there's some kind of magical forecast that you can beat the market, then I can accept market rates of returns and use academic investing principles to build my portfolio. So it sends the investing process in a whole different direction.
We are talking to Mark Matson. He is the creator of the American Dream Experience, a conference dedicated to teaching families how to understand their purpose and reclaim their dream, and the Matson Method, a tool that integrates research in behavioral economics, finance, neuropsychology, and human performance. And we are talking about the American Dream Experience. We're going to take a short break. I'm Doc G, and this is the Earn and Invest podcast. All right, I'm going to read us back in a moment. Any questions or problems so far?
That was great. Really fun.
Yeah, and your outro there right at the end is perfect because the next thing I want to go into is the academic investing principles. So that was like you teed it off perfectly for after the break.
Brilliant.
So that's
Awesome.
awesome. All right. And all right, give me just a second. We are back on three, two, one. We are back with Mark Matson. His book is Experiencing the American Dream, which is going to be available through Wiley August 27th. And we're talking about the American Dream. Before the break, you were talking about academic investing principles. And specifically, I want to get to those. First and foremost, are equities the most powerful ways to invest? Is there any alternative way outside of equities?
Well, I always tell people that equities are the greatest wealth creation tool on the planet, and for three reasons. Number one, all the great services and products, that cell phone in your pocket, uh, that you may be listening to this podcast on. Everything that you have, all the products, all the services, all the medicine, all of that comes from technology. All that's driven from capitalism because the capital goes to companies that then create all these great things in quality of life that everybody, most people are take advantage of. The second thing is that all the jobs, everything, all including the government jobs, because you have to tax people to get that money. But then finally, that the returns on equities have been absolutely incredible over the years, far greater than most people invest. Dalbar research shows that the average asset allocation investors only averaged a little over 2% per year over the last 30 years, which is dismal. The S&P, on the other hand, clocks in at 10%. Small stocks, around 2%. More than that at 12%. Small value stocks at 14%. Of course, you have international stocks. Most people can't stand a whole equity exposure because it is a lot of volatility, especially as you're nearing retirement. So high quality fixed income to offset that volatility. But equities, I see a lot of people invest in toxic assets today. And it's really reality. And a lot of the most popular investments are very toxic and destructive.
Hey,
Gold, I
Mark,
hear gold. Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
going to stop you from. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I just lost your
Oh,
image
okay.
for about 2 minutes, but we just got it back.
Okay, great.
Do you know where you just were if we start again?
Yes. Yeah.
Three, two, one.
Yeah. So, yes, equities are the greatest wealth creation tool on the planet, in my estimation. And people are investing in a lot of really toxic things, trying to beat the equity return, and then they end up getting often destroyed. So sometimes you'll hear about commodities. Commodities have a zero, this is stunning, a zero rate of return over the last 15 years. Zero. Gold. Gold historically only has about a 5% rate of return with the same volatility as equities. Equities clock in at 10 like the S&P. So that's absurd. Bitcoin, there's no there. There's no companies behind it. There's no equity. There's no business. There's no intellectual property. There's no, so it's just basically P.T. Barnum, the greater fool theory. There's a sucker born every minute. So I see alternatives. People are trying to get in, with this idea of invest like a billionaire to be a billionaire, get rich quick. So yes, equities, long-term exposure to equities in the right allocation with discipline, for me, is still the greatest wealth creation tool on the planet.
So what we're talking about is the equity premium, this idea that there are increased returns with equities as opposed to alternative asset classes. We're going to talk about some of those other premiums in a moment, but let's talk about good equities versus bad equities. Let's chat about stock picking. Hands down, is it a bad idea?
Yeah, I have a thing. Stock picking in all of its forms is destructive. Every single one of them.
Period.
Period. Because all of the noble and predictable information is already in the price. Therefore, it's a pure gamble. Nobody knows what the next Apple is going to be. No one knows what the next NVIDIA is going to be. It's delusional to think that you do. You mentioned portfolios, and 34 years ago, when I started my company, I thought, wow, when people see the academic research, efficient market theory, the three-factor model by Fama and French, Harry Markowitz, who was on our academic board before he passed, Nobel Prize winner for free market portfolio theory. I thought when academics see this, when practitioners, financial planners see this, it'll be a grand revolution, but it never happened. When I analyze portfolios today, I might see one or two little index funds, but then there's massive active funds in there, which are stock picking. There's exotic garbage in there, a lot of ETFs that is really just stock picking in a different form and speculation in a different form. Individual stocks is kind of a Frankenstein portfolio. So really things haven't gotten any better over the last 40 years. If anything, it's actually gotten worse. But stock picking increases your volatility, increases your risk. Buying a handful of S&P 500 fund or stocks rather instead of the S&P itself, an individual stock will have 3 to 4 times the volatility of the index itself. So it makes absolutely no sense.
You mentioned academic investing principles. And from my reading of your book, I understand that is really a three-pronged attack, right? There's the efficient market theory, right? This idea that everything there is to know about equities is built into the market already. So basically it's efficient. 2, there's the 3 factors, and there we're talking about premiums, things like the equity premium, and we'll talk about later the small premium and the value premium. And then modern portfolio theory, this idea that we can measure returns versus risk and find that happy medium. Let's go to basics here. Can a person beat the market? And when I say the market, what do I really mean?
Well, in general, you started off the podcast with the question about, hey, look, if I build a market portfolio, I slightly tilt to small in value, and I stay disciplined. The market, when people talk about it, typically means the S&P. And if you look at, there are 5,000 plus stocks you could buy in the U.S., but if you look at market weighting, the vast majority of that, 80% plus, is just the S&P 500 stocks. And most people, when they allocate a market portfolio, what they don't realize is you're mainly just getting the S&P. You're not getting much market exposure to microcap or small or value. It's still mainly S&P 500 stocks. And that's typically what they're talking about. So if I say, okay, look, I'm going to get 100 managers who try to beat the S&P and say you're going to beat by buying S&P 500 stocks, 90% of the managers after 15 years fail to deliver a market rate of return. 90%. And the 10% who got lucky don't repeat. Now, it's not just that active managers don't add return, they actually subtract return. By blind random luck, half of them should beat the market over 15 years. But after fees and expenses and costs, they actually do worse than the market. And this doesn't matter if you're a professional manager. Look, Fidelity has over 1,400 different mutual funds. If they knew what manager was the best manager, they'd have one fund. And if that manager knew what the best stocks were, he'd have one fund, one stock at a time. And it's absolutely absurd. And if they did know what the best stocks were, they sure as heck wouldn't tell you. And they wouldn't go on TV and they wouldn't tell you what their prediction is. They'd be richer than Bill Gates and Zuckerberg and Musk combined. Because there's always some stock making even 1,000% in a year. And if you knew how to do that, you wouldn't share that information with anybody else. So stock picking definitely has to come off the list of things a prudent investor would want to do for their retirement.
I want to get into a little bit of insider baseball, or what feels like insider baseball here when we're talking about quote unquote beating the market. Let's talk about some of these factors, some of these premiums, some of these ways that we can do maybe a little better than the market. You mentioned it already. For instance, if you look at small cap returns, maybe we're 12% compared to 10% with S&P 500 index over a certain number of years. And then if you throw in small cap value, you get up to 14%. 2 questions about this. Let's start with the first one. If I were to say, well, what's the difference? If we're talking about beating the market, what is the difference in doing a small cap value tilt versus saying, I'm just going to look at Warren Buffett, who's done amazing, and follow Warren Buffett and whatever he buys? Because to me, in a sense, what you're saying is, okay, we know what the market is. The baseline is, you and I kind of defined it as the S&P 500 index. Both of these are mechanisms we hope to beat the market, get a little bit better returns. One is by blindly following someone else who's kind of a guru who just makes what appear to be random decisions. The other is to get into these other factors. But why is that more academic than just, for instance, following Buffett?
Yeah. Well, I, one of the Wall Street bullies I talk about is the prognosticator, another is the guru. Um, when in my interview with Professor Fama, Nobel Prize winner, I asked him the question, how many years of data would you have to have of someone beating the market to have a high confidence level that it wasn't random or luck? And he said 72 years. And by the time you had 72 years of data, and you'd have to beat it by 2 or 3% a year, and then it'd have to have a high statistical T-stat to prove that it wasn't luck, the guy would be dead. And you know, the reality is, yeah, Warren Buffett did really well for quite some time, beating the S&P handily. But over the last 15 years, it hasn't been that great. And he has not consistently outperformed the S&P. So it's easy to find these gurus in the past, harder to find them going forward. On the other hand, the premiums seem to be very persistent. The reason that small companies have a higher expected return than large companies is because of the cost of capital formula. Companies have a cost of raising money. And the more risky that company is, the higher their cost of capital. Therefore, the higher the return to the person providing that capital. So small companies, everyone would have to agree, are more risky than big companies. Therefore, they have to return a higher percentage return to investors over the long term. Small value companies are not only small, but in addition, they're depressed. So they have a lot of assets relative to their price, which means they're small and distressed, which means they're even more risky. So the premiums come from the cost of capital, not from the manager's ability to pick the bad ones versus the good ones. And the question is, do I do it myself? Do I have an advisor? The problem with the do-it-yourself route is that there's so much noise. Even if I gave you a model, a pie chart, and said, here's your mix, you stick to this mix. Don't ever leave this mix. And when the market drops 50% like 2008, 2009, then you sell your fixed income because it's down 50%, and you buy the equities while they're down. You rebalance to your targets. When it runs way back up, you sell the equities and you buy the fixed income. So that is an extremely difficult discipline. I have rarely seen anyone, even a financial professional, consistently apply it. So you've got hindsight bias, which makes people think that whatever was hot, they can buy again. You've got herding bias. Everybody wants to do what their friends are doing. They feel like there's safety in numbers, maybe for zebra, not for investors. You've got confirmation bias. Once you get emotionally attracted to something, you start only searching through the information that confirms whatever your bias is, whatever stock you want to pick. You've got instincts to run away from things that are painful. You've got emotions. So the human side, the brain side, and that's the Matson method, where you have to know the academics to build the portfolio, but you have to understand the human brain and your mental processes. That's a lifelong journey, because I can just, by pushing one button on Robinhood, I can destroy my whole portfolio in a second. And that's what makes it so difficult.
I want to even go further with the divide of having a financial advisor versus doing it yourself, especially when it comes to, let's look at the small and the value premium. So we're talking about small cap value. I was watching a video this morning in preparation for this interview with Ben Felix from Common Sense Investing, and he was making what seemed to be a very cogent argument to me that even if you are wise enough as a DIY investor to realize that there is this small cap value premium, you know, those numbers you gave me, the 12% and the 14% for small cap versus small cap value, were dimensional funds. And DFA funds, from my understanding, they not only are great indexes for those things, but they also removed a lot of the junk out of the index. And if you go, for instance, to a Vanguard small cap value, et cetera, you find that the performance is not exactly the same, because there's been some messing around with it more than just general indexing. So it kind of begs the question, even people like me who kind of are savvy enough and listen to a lot of smart people and read a lot of blogs and listen to a lot of podcasts, as a DIY investor, can you truly take advantage of those premiums?
It's very difficult. And the reason is because I have a whole chapter in the book showing Vanguard versus Dimensional. I've been working with them for many years, and David Booth, the CEO of Dimensional, gave an endorsement for the book. Um, and the problem is that the academics and Vanguard and Morningstar, they don't define small and value the same. They have two. One is retail, so Vanguard is slanted more towards large, and even if they say small, they have more mid cap. They don't define value the same way. So when I build a portfolio, I'm looking at the academics, Eugene Fama, and their definition for what these asset categories are. And I've been working with Dimensional for many, many years, and their returns have, and it's in the book, you can check it out, but they're much higher than Vanguard. And I see people try to reverse engineer the thing, right? And then they end up really hurting their returns.
Yeah, and it's notable that Dimension funds are not available to retail investors. If you're DIYer, you're not going to have traditional access to Dimension funds.
Yeah, the structured funds are only available through the advisors. Yes, that's true.
Do you think that premium, so I'm going to call this an advisor premium, right? Access to dimensional funds, access to someone who hopefully will make better decisions when times get tough. Do you think that overtakes the costs of having an advisor? Because it's one thing to say that I'm going to make 12 or 14% instead of 10%. But there are some advisors out there, very good ones, who charge their own premium of 1 to 2% on top of it. Does it make up for it?
Well, it does if two things. If the advisor truly is disciplined, because
which is not a given.
Yeah, which is not a given. It's not a given at all, because you can have access to the structured funds that have premiums, but the reality is you're only going to get those premiums if you're disciplined over very, very long periods of time. And I've seen advisors that have said, made brave statements that I will never panic and I will never sell my clients out and I will never do all these things. And then 2008 and 9 came around, and I saw advisors with hundreds of millions of dollars of their clients' money panic when the market was down 50% and sell the equities and buy fixed income, the exact opposite of what you're supposed to do, which was rebalancing. And then I also see them getting seduced by hot asset categories. Like 2008-9 was a great period. Commodities did huge during just a small 2-3 year period. Wasn't very long. And advisors started skewing their portfolios towards that. I've seen advisors put Bitcoin in their portfolios. I've seen them put REITs in their portfolios. I've seen them put all these exotic and toxic investments in their portfolio that had nothing to do with the research. And then the other thing that they do is they fail to diversify internationally, which would come from Harry Markowitz's research. So on modern portfolio theory. So I think your advisor should do a couple things for you. Number one is your advisor should educate you so that you can make your own decision about your model and your allocation. And most don't. They just say, here's your questionnaire. I'm going to throw you in this model. Bad decision. They should educate you, take the time to educate you on all the premiums and why you're doing what you're doing. Help you get your true purpose for money first, not after. They should educate you what speculating and gambling is. And then they should have a 30-plus year track record of staying disciplined to that investment philosophy and structure, proving that they rebalanced. Since I've been in business, you had 9/11, which was terrible. You had the tech crash in 2000. 2008 and 9, you saw the real estate crash. And then you had the COVID crash. So there's in the last 34 years, 4 major crashes. And I've seen more advisors than I can care to count that sold their clients out when they needed them the most.
You talk about this idea that advisors shouldn't just be an advisor, they should also be a coach. What's the difference?
Yeah. So an advisor will say, okay, I advise you to buy this, or I advise you to buy that. A coach should train you and develop you so that, number one, you understand the principles yourself. Number two, that you actually have a purpose for why you're doing what you're doing and you know why. Commit to lifelong ironclad discipline and commit to coaching you and training you. I got to talk to Michael Phelps and interviewed him, and he was talking about his coach, Bob Bowman, and how there's no way he could have won 28 gold medals if he hadn't had that coach. Because there will be time. There's 2 things that cause people to go nuts relative to their money and their portfolio. One is external stress. And think about the external stress everybody's facing today. You know, you have a contentious election, you have two wars going on, fear of recession, very high inflation over the last 3 or 4 years. You have what a lot of people think is an increase in violence. You have pretty much open border. So you got a lot of fear and contention. And if you don't believe me, just think about the debate you saw a couple of days ago, or as of the first debate, the presidential debate. There's just a lot of fear. So people panic when there's fear. Then the other thing that happens is you have the external forces on your life creating stress and anxiety, but you also have the internal forces. Person loses a job, a child needs to go into rehab, someone gets cancer. All these things that can happen internally to your family and externally in the world. And that stress and anxiety can cause you to panic and make terrible decisions with your money. At the time, and investing is not like other types of things. If I'm on a diet and I lost 30 pounds, I've been working out, getting in shape, feeling great, getting some of my energy back, and I go have one piece of cheesecake, that's not going to, put me in the hospital for a heart attack. But that's not the way investing works. You can make one mistake on one day, and it can cost you 40 years of hard work. And that coach should keep you disciplined to that process and tell you no, even when you don't want to hear no. And if you have a great advisor, a great coach, they would rather lose you as a client than allow you to do behaviors that are imprudent and destructive to your portfolio. And there are darn few of those. And if you find one, you should stick with them.
I want to close this conversation by returning to the beginning in 1960s Appalachia, maybe even today. Your dad partially escaped because he had one of those changes in his terministic screen, right? He
Yes.
saw the world as it was presented to him, and he decided to look at it through a different lens. There are many, many, many people who lived amongst him, his peers, the kids he went to school with, who never left. How do we help those people? Is that a legislative answer? Is that a knowledge and teaching answer? Is that they need to just at some point decide they want it bad enough themselves? Like, where is the line? And how do we as a society who see people having these, what your grandfather had was a very destructive mindset when it came to money. Like, how do we fix this for a larger population of people?
That's a great question. I mean, his mindset was so negative around money. Union Carbide offered him a job to get off of the front line, where he eventually got emphysema that killed him. They offered him a job in management, and he turned it down. He could have saved his family. He could have helped the people under him by being a better manager than the ones they had. He could have created value for other people. He was really smart. He could have even been an executive, but he refused because his negative views and his self-talk about money and his money demons just destroyed him. How do you help more people? Well, I don't think it's legislative, because we've been trying that for a long time. It doesn't seem to work. I think it's education. It's got to start with educating people. And there's two basic screens for economic screens. One is personal accountability, serving other people first. There is no free lunch. No one owes you anything. My dad always told me no one owes you anything. And without these screens, I wouldn't be an entrepreneur today, and I wouldn't be on the podcast today, and I wouldn't have written a book. The screens open up so much. And the other screen, though, the counter screen, is victimhood. And we can all play victim. I've definitely played a victim in my life. Why me? And I'm sad. And why aren't things lining up for me better? And why are things so hard? But that victimhood screen is a block to all other screens. And I think it's a matter of education, and it's that kind of poverty and those negative victim screens are generational, and they persist, and they're handed down one generation after another. And that's why a lot of our relatives are still in West Virginia. But I think it's a matter of education and leadership and mentorship and coaching and training. And I don't think the government's very well suited to that.
Well, Mark Matson, I wanted to thank you for coming on the show today. As I think about our conversation, two things really stick with me. One is purpose before money, right? Money is a tool, and we need to figure out what we want to use that tool for, and that's purpose. And the next is just because purpose is more important than money doesn't mean that we shouldn't be really smart with our money. And the way to be really smart with our money are these academic investing principles. You might not agree with every one of Mark's, but the point is there's data out there and there's some really smart people who are thinking about what to do with our money. And we are silly not to pay attention to it, not to look at the data and try to create the most premiums, get the best return we can. I want to end this episode the way I end every episode. Mark, tell us about your book. It is coming out August 27th, Experiencing the American Dream. This episode will air sometime around then. When can people get, or where can people get the book?
Yeah, they can get it on Amazon. They can get it on Goodreads. It's going to be in a lot of airports, bookstores, but definitely you can go online and grab it on Amazon. Very easy to do.
And if people want to know more about you or get in touch with you directly, what's the best way for them to do that?
It's Matson, Mark. It's www.matsonmoney.com. You can definitely learn about the American Dream Experience, the class that we teach. You can learn more about the book. I've written several others, but really looking forward to this one. I really got a lot of help with this one, a lot of input. Rob Lowe wrote the foreword to it. Dr. Art Laffer wrote the epilogue. Gary Sinise also wrote a section on the American Dream. So it was really a group process. It was a lot of fun to do, and I hope a lot of people can get that screen of the American Dream in these chaotic times. I think it'll make a big difference for their family.
Mark Matson, thank you so much for being on Earn and Invest today.
Thanks, Jordan. I really appreciate it.
That's a wrap. All right, I leave things running, so I leave recording going on just to catch some of our after show, what we talk about. What I always tell people with a book like yours is there is no way in 40 minutes I could cover all the important, great stuff in your book. We talked about some of it. Is there anything that I missed or anything you want to make sure people hear about the book if we didn't cover it in that first 40 minutes?
I thought it was just great. I thought it was excellent, and we really covered a lot of ground during that, and I appreciate coming back to the family story, and that was great, very good. I like the fact that you know so much about the investing and the portfolio construction, and that's something that got to come up because not everybody knows about that kind of stuff. So I really appreciate that. Was fun to talk about.
Yeah, it is. And it's something I think a lot about, right? Because I think there are two big influences. I kind of grew up in the financial independence retire early community, although I'm not a big fan of retiring early because I have all these things I want to do. I just don't think of it as traditional work. I have passion about doing things. But those two real influences, the ones that I really kind of grew up with, are J.L. Collins on one side, The Simple Path to Wealth, by VTSAX, Total Market Index, and that's it, versus Paul Merriman, who originally was looking at, 10 different factors and then down to 6 and then 3. And now, he's constructing portfolios that are literally 2 or 3 different index funds, but are trying to bring in some of those premiums like small cap and value. And I think it's a real debate. And so while that is somewhat insider baseball, because who you write this book to and what most people need is a much broader, right? Because they just don't understand the equity premium, much less the smaller value premium.
Right.
So, I think the bigger conversation is that stuff, but it enthralls me to get into the smaller stuff because, if you go down to it, I spoke at Bogleheads last year and there was a whole Paul Merriman, God, I forgot who he was debating, but there's a whole debate about whether you should do the small cap value premium or not. And there's a lot of people who believe that those premiums are overblown, especially I think the small premium as opposed to the value premium. But there's a lot of academic argument out there about it. And I think it's just fascinating.
Yeah, we had, so I take the research and then try to validate that with outside experts. So Dr. Lyman Otts, who's on our academic board, he's written several books for PhD level classes in statistics. And he also worked for the big, large drug companies doing tests on the efficacy of different drugs or whether it was a placebo. And I had him look at the small and the value premium, the equity premium. And he said the chances of the small premium being random is much, much less than 1 in 1,000. And the chance of the value premium being random is much, much less than 1 in 1,000. I said, well, what is it? What is it? He said, well, statisticians don't really like to talk in these terms, but between me and you, it's like 1 in 10 million. So the odds of it being random are just are small, minuscule. But if you're not disciplined and you don't stay in it for 40 years, it's
Yeah,
going to
you
mess you
you had to
up.
fight with your own dad about it, right? You
My
guys
own
you guys
dad's
got into
right.
it. Yeah, you
No.
guys because well, small cap value has had some rough years in there. It's not
Oh
like it's
yeah,
all been hunky dory, right?
yeah. The dead decade from 2000 to 2010, it was phenomenal. Small value was up 8% a year. Large was down 1% a year. It was real easy to convince people to be diversified after that 10-year period. But it was tough right there. 95 to 2000, tech stocks and large stocks. That's all anybody wanted to buy. And then tech stocks lost 75%, and large stocks lost over 50%. And so it was literally a dead decade. And then international investing, you see a lot of people, and it's really a subtle form of market timing, because after a 5 or 10 year period, when one of the premiums underperforms, they'll start to tilt their portfolio towards the asset category that had the highest performance, especially if it's large US, because it's the one people are most familiar with. Instead of rebalancing and buying more of the asset category that's relatively low. And that's why it's so difficult for people. And then, of course, after 10-year periods where it's better, you never see those papers about, why you shouldn't diversify. They kind of melt away. But inside, like you said, inside baseball.
One last question. It's my favorite question to ask authors is I found in writing books, every time I write a book, it changes. I come to a conclusion, or I learn something that I didn't think I'd learn writing the book. Anything while writing this book where you're like, oh, I wasn't clear on that, or oh, maybe I don't feel that way, or boy, this is really how it is.
Yeah, I have. Yeah. So I was talking this chapter on money demons, and I talk about how you find a money demon is you look for a complaint. Taxes are too high, or I can't find the best people, or why can't I find a woman that likes me for myself, or, instead of the money, or, you have these complaints, and everybody has complaints about money. And normally they come down to I just don't have enough. But I was talking to my vice president, and he said, well, if it all comes back to a complaint, is there always a complaint? And I said, yeah, there is always a complaint. And then I thought, why is there a complaint? Well, there's a complaint because I feel like I'm entitled to something that I don't have. And I talk about victimhood and entitlement as something is very negative. And I had to come to the realization, I'm sitting in the trailer, I'm writing that day, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm entitled. That's why I bitch and moan about different things. Oh, it's, the government takes too much money, or, oh, it's hard to get the right employees, or, oh, advisors leave and they're jealous. I mean, so I had to come to the realization that the thing that I tend to really detest, being entitled and playing the victim, I had to come to the reality that I do the same thing. I do the exact same thing. And I was like, okay, all right. You learn what you write. You need to learn what you write about. And that showed me that everybody has it. No matter how much money person has, that sense of entitlement can still be there.
Yeah, I've done a lot of thinking about victimhood, and of course that's a loaded word, right? Victim or
Oh
victimhood,
yeah,
especially in today's society. And my take on it is this: I think no one escapes unscathed, and because we only have our own lived experience, like I can't compare what I would consider my sense of victimhood to yours, because maybe you were beaten or raped or had something horrible happen to you, and maybe I was just made fun of. But in my reality, since that's all I've had, that was my victimhood. So it's not that we aren't victims at points in our lives. I mean, shitty things happen to everyone, some of them
absolutely.
big, some of them small, but we only know our lived experience. So it's not whether you're a victim or not. We're all victims. The question is, how do you interpret? What are the stories you tell yourself about your past? And unhappy people tend to tell themselves victim stories, whereas happy people tend to tell them hero stories. And often what we would consider the level of victimhood for each person has nothing to do with which story they tell them. So you'll hear people who have lost family members and gone through tragic, horrible things, but they tell themselves a hero story and end up being very happy in the present. Whereas you'll have people who went through what a lot of us might call mild trauma or mild victims, but their whole outlook, because they tell them a victim story about their life, is negative. And it's really interesting. I mean, I've spent a lot. So right now I have in press a book that's coming out in January called The Purpose Codes. It's all about purpose. And I think a lot about the difference between meaning and purpose. Because meaning, I think, is very much how we cognitively think about the past. It's the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And that's where that victimhood really comes in. Whereas
Yes.
purpose is about our present and future and is about our actions. And so I see a lot of people who are having trouble with meaning, and they're telling themselves a victim story, and they think they can purpose themselves to happiness. So they feel like a victim in their childhood, so they go create big things or try to become billionaires or try to whatever they're trying to achieve that they think is going to fill that hole of feeling like a victim. And it never does, because you can't purpose your way there. You actually have to go back and reinterpret your past, which is telling yourself a better story. You would probably call it a terministic screen. It's changing your terministic screen of your past such that you are a hero as opposed to a victim.
Yeah, that's exactly how I would describe it. And you're right. We all face things that make us feel like a victim. When I was 30 years old and I was losing my hips from osteonecrosis, I thought,
From
why
steroids. Yeah.
me? I can't believe this is happening to me. And I was a victim. I was sad. I felt like a martyr. Problem is that if you stay there, you just end up with, it's not being victimized. It's I am a victim.
Yes.
And once that sticks, that if you don't change that so that you're the hero of your own story, it's a screen that just shapes every single thing that you see. And I can't wait to read your book. I looked it
Yeah.
up on Amazon.
Yeah,
Looks
I'll
like
be
it's
happy to send you with the purpose code. So I wrote a book called Taking Stock, which talks more about kind of what the dying had taught me about money and life. The second book, The Purpose Code, I'm more than happy to send you a digital copy if you'd like one now. Just
oh,
don't hand it out because it's not out yet.
would love it. Would love to see it.
Yeah, I'll
Would
send you
love
one
it.
right after we're done here. Let me
Okay.
hit stop on this just so I stop the recording.